He told me my only value was my silence, that a human mate was a stain on everything he had built, that I should be grateful he kept me at all. I believed him. For 3 years, I believed him. I patched his wounds, I kept his secrets. I loved him with everything a human heart could carry. And then I loved him a little more, because I thought that was what devotion looked like. And when the rogues came screaming out of the dark, he looked at me. He looked at me like I was finally useful, and he pushed me toward them. He used my life to buy himself 10 seconds to run. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second.
Alpha Silas thought he bought his freedom with her blood. He thought a dead human mate was a clean slate. He thought the girl he threw to the wolves would dissolve quietly into the dark and stay there. He was wrong about everything. Because the creature that caught April in the dark that night had a name that made alphas lose sleep, and a story that made their blood run cold. He just didn't know she was coming.
Chapter 1. Kale. Before April, there was Kale. 600 years ago, he was not a shadow creature in the oldest forest in the north. He was a wolf. The most powerful alpha the Northern Territories had ever produced. His pack, the Vale, was the founding bloodline. 3,000 wolves, a territory so vast it took 4 days to cross. He was 26. He was unstoppable. The 7 alphas who bordered his territory knew it, so they met without him, planned without him. 7 packs combined, and they didn't come to fight. They came to erase him. They burned the veil from the edges inward. They killed everyone. He fought until he was the last one standing, 26 years old, last living Vale wolf. 7 alphas surrounding him in a burning field, and they made their mistake. They didn't finish it. They thought a wolf with nothing wasn't worth fearing. That was the last mistake any of them ever made. He went into the oldest part of the forest and down into the dark underneath the oldest trees. He didn't come back as a wolf. What came back had no category. The void had recognized his grief as kinship, had opened to him, had given him one thing, the ability to see the full truth of things. Not thoughts, not minds. The truth underneath every performance. What people had actually done. What they actually were when no one was watching. The truth. The first alpha who crossed into his territory came 6 months later. 30 wolves, full aggression. Kale looked at him, showed him the truth of himself. The alpha collapsed from the inside. The full, unmediated truth of everything he had ever done reflected back without mercy. He left the forest human, his wolf gone, not taken, surrendered. Because a wolf that has seen the full truth of itself and found it unendurable cannot sustain the bond between man and animal. The wolf leaves on its own. 13 more came over the centuries. All 13 left the same way. The wolf world called him a monster, built warnings around his forest, kept their children away. What they never mentioned was that Kale had never once left his forest. Not to pursue, not to hunt, not to take anything from anyone. He simply existed. With the truth of what had been done to him, and the specific grief of someone who had loved 3,000 people and survived them all. He wasn't a monster. He was the last Vale, and he had been alone for 600 years. Until the night April ran into his forest bleeding and looked up at him from the snow. Chapter 2. The Alpha Who Broke Me. April had been the only human in the Blackthorn Pack for 3 years, not a servant, his fated mate. The bond arrived on Silas's 24th birthday and pointed at the human woman in the corner, focused, precise, The specific quality of someone who had decided competence was her only currency in a world that had given her nothing else. He accepted publicly, smiled for the pack, called her his. Behind closed doors, he made sure she understood what she actually was: a liability dressed as a mate. She carried the pack on her back without credit. She ran the infirmary. She built the human alliances that fed them through winter. She talked Silas down from 3 wars that would have cost more than the pack could recover from. She was his conscience. He hated her for it. The vampire princess of the North had been available for 18 months. Political marriage, supernatural bloodline, the alliance that turned a strong pack into a dynasty. One obstacle: the human girl who kept saving people he needed gone. He started planning. She started noticing. Not the plan, the edges of it. Conversations stopping when she entered rooms, his beta's eyes moving away, a coldness settling into the pack house like weather. She filed it. She didn't have a plan yet. The forest did. The border patrol was her idea. She suggested it because she could feel the distance growing, and she was still trying to reach him. Still trying to find the man she had given 3 years to underneath all that cold calculation. He agreed immediately. Of course he did. It was perfect. The rogues hit at dusk, 40 of them. Coordinated, not random, arranged. The specific choreography of an attack that had been paid for in advance. She turned to Silas. He was already stepping back. She said his name. He looked at her with the flat expression of a man completing a transaction. He leaned down. "Goodbye, April." Quiet, almost gentle, like she was a door he was closing. He shifted. He ran. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. She watched him disappear into the trees. 3 years of loving someone with everything she had. 3 years of making herself useful and small and undemanding and grateful. Everything a human mate in a wolf pack needed to be to justify her presence. And he said goodbye like she was furniture being removed. That was the moment she stopped being the girl who loved Silas Blackthorn. She ran, not toward the pack border, into the deep forest, into the dark, into the territory the Blackthorn Pack had been carefully avoiding her entire life. No plan, no destination, only fury. And sometimes fury is enough. Chapter 3: The Monster in the Forest. She ran until her body stopped cooperating. The rogues slowed behind her, the forest getting stranger the deeper she went, the trees enormous and ancient, the air carrying a weight that made the rogues behind her slow without understanding why their instincts were screaming to stop. She collapsed, blood in the snow. She looked up. Kale was already there, standing at the edge of the dark, eyes burning deep red, looking at her with the full truth of her. Not her wounds, not her blood, not the human fragility the wolf world had always used to dismiss her. The truth underneath all of it. The specific, fierce, unbreakable quality of someone who had been told she was nothing for 3 years and had run into the most dangerous forest in the Northern Territories rather than lie down and let it be the end. He had seen the truth of 14 alphas. He had never seen anything like this. "Are you going to hurt me?" Not a scream, not a plea. The question flat and direct from a woman bleeding in the snow who needed the answer. No. Then I need help. No pleading, no performance, just, I need help. He had been alone for 600 years. He stepped back from the dark. He made room. The citadel smelled like rain that had never dried. Like stone cold for so long it had become its own kind of warmth. Like old paper and mineral water and centuries of silence. She healed in a week. She found the archive on the 6th day. 600 years of history, untouched. The veil records kept by the last veil because there was no one else to keep them. He stood in the doorway while she read. He didn't speak. He didn't leave. The first night she fell asleep there, he covered her with a blanket. He didn't explain why. She didn't ask. On the 14th night, she spoke without looking up from her book. "You could sit down." "I am fine standing." "You have been standing in that doorway for 40 minutes. He crossed the room. He sat in the chair opposite her. She kept reading. He sat. Neither of them mentioned that this was different from the doorway. It simply was. On the 30th night, "You are different than the stories." "What do the stories say?" "That you break things." "I have broken things." She looked up. "You showed people the truth of themselves, and they couldn't survive the seeing. That's on them." He looked at her, the truth of her, the real size, looking at him like he deserved to be looked at. "You are the first person to say that." "Someone should have said it 400 years ago." She went back to her book. He sat in his chair, and Kale, who had seen the truth of 14 alphas and had never been seen in return, felt something shift, deep, slow, like roots moving in old ground. Chapter 4. The First Time I Was Seen. The training started on day 21. "You are not ready," he said. "I have been ready my entire life, and nobody told me what I was ready for." "Start." She failed. Again. And again. 19 days of nothing. The void didn't respond to effort. It responded to truth. And April had spent 3 years suppressing the truth of herself to fit around someone else's comfort. On day 12, she sat on the cold stone floor and said it. Not to him, not to the room, to herself. "I am not asking anymore." The light came up, stayed. 1 minute, 2, 5. She held it for 5 minutes and looked at Kale and almost smiled. He almost smiled back. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Day 19. The light stopped being contained. It reached outward from her in every direction simultaneously, running along every surface, filling the citadel with violet like a sun coming up from the inside. She looked at Kale. He was standing very still at the edge of the room. His expression, something that had not been on his face in 600 years. Awe. She pulled it back, contained it. Hers. Again, this time bigger, enough to shatter every window in this building. That would take. Every window in the citadel shattered outward simultaneously, glass raining into the forest outside. He looked at the empty frames. He looked at her. "I didn't mean to do it that fast." "No." "Are you angry?" He looked at 600 years of carefully maintained black glass in pieces in the snow. "No. I will rebuild them." "I will help." He looked at her, the real size, standing in a chamber full of empty window frames, offering to help rebuild the windows she had just shattered, as if that was simply what you did. Yes, all right. They rebuilt the windows. 4 days, side by side. The best 4 days Kale had experienced in 600 years. On the night before she was ready to go back, he told her the truth. Not as performance, not as a claim, as truth, because he was incapable of anything else. "I have been alone for 600 years. I had made peace with it, and then you ran into my forest and something in me shifted. I love you. I have been falling in love with you for 3 months, and I did not name it until tonight. And now I cannot not name it." April looked at him, at the 600-year-old grief, at the only honest thing she had encountered in years. "I know. I have known for weeks. I was waiting for you to say it first. You needed to. You have been alone for 600 years. You needed to be the one who said it first. He had seen the truth of 14 alphas. He had never been seen in return, until her. The marriage happened 3 nights later. Not ceremony, not strategy dressed as union. The void witnessed it. The oldest trees witnessed it. I choose you. Not the Shadow King, not the power. You. I choose you. Not the vessel, not the weapon. You. April. The real size. She looked at him after. Now, let's go get what's mine. He almost smiled. She had been making him almost smile for 3 months. He had missed it before he knew what it was. Chapter 5. The Power They Tried to Bury. The second month, 40 rogues at the Citadel border. The same pack Silas had paid to kill her. Cale moved to go out. April put her hand on his arm. No, this one is mine. She walked out alone. No shadow demons, no Cale, no walls. Just April standing in the snow in front of 40 rogues with violet light moving quietly under her skin like a second heartbeat. The rogues saw her and laughed. A human, alone, in the snow. The laughter lasted 4 seconds. Then the violet light blazed. Not an attack, not a weapon. The truth. The full, void-amplified truth of what she was, blazing outward like a sun coming up. The rogues felt it in their bones, in the oldest part of their wolf instinct, the part that knew before the mind did what it was looking at. One by one they went to their knees, then all 40, in the snow, in front of a human woman who 3 months ago had been left for dead in this forest. Get up, you work for me now. Not one of them hesitated. What Silas didn't know was that she wasn't the one being hunted anymore. Chapter 6. The Day He Lost Everything. Every alpha in the Northern Territories received the same summons. Emergency summit, borders shrinking, rogue activity in patterns nobody could explain. Nobody except the people who sent the summons. Silas arrived with his new Luna, settled confidence of a man who had solved his problems cleanly. He had held a beautiful memorial. He had grieved perfectly. He had everything he wanted. The torches turned violet, every single one, simultaneously. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 4 seconds. The doors did not open. They disintegrated. Dust where solid wood had been a moment before. Through the dust, 2 7-foot shadow demons stepping into the hall. And between them, April. Jet black hair, skin carrying that violet luminescence, not a glow, the suggestion of something enormous living just beneath the surface. Moving through the disintegrated doorway like she had designed this room and had come to inspect it. The hall went absolutely silent. Every alpha present feeling something in their wolf instinct they had not felt since childhood. The stories their elders told, the warnings, the thing in the oldest forest, walking toward them. She moved past the first table without looking at them, past the second, past the guards who stepped forward and stopped when the shadow demons turned their heads. Just turned their heads. That was enough. She reached the head of the table, the seat reserved for the High Sovereign. She sat down. She looked at the assembled alphas with the expression of someone who had permanently stopped performing for other people's comfort. We have business to discuss. Silas stood up. His chair hit the floor behind him. His face went the color of a man whose clean solution has just taken a seat at his table. She looked at him for the first time since she walked in, at the Alpha who had said goodbye and run. She looked at him the way you looked at something that had stopped being relevant. "Sit down, Silas." Silk over grinding stone. "The adults are talking." He sat down. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Not one Alpha spoke, not one challenged, because the shadow demons were at the door, because the violet light was moving under her skin like a warning, because every wolf instinct in the room was screaming the same thing. This is the void vessel. This is what the oldest lore described. This is the thing that predates us. She addressed the summit for 20 minutes. The rogue situation, her rogues, her command. A message, not an attack. The borders that had been shrinking, her borders now. Every Alpha in the room understanding, without being told directly, that the map had changed. Any questions? There were no questions. On her way out, she passed Silas. She did not stop. She did not look at him. She walked past him like he was furniture. That, more than anything else that happened in that hall, was the moment Silas Blackthorn understood what he had thrown away. He found her on the balcony after the summit. She heard him coming. She did not turn. He performed. He had never stopped searching. There had not been a single day. The memorial was grief, not closure. And now she was here and she let him finish. Every word, every perfectly assembled syllable of performed devotion. Then, "I know, Silas." He stopped. "I know you stood at the edge of the forest and watched. I know you drove home. I know what you said at the memorial. I know what you felt when you said it." The balcony was very quiet. "I married the Hollow King." A different quality of quiet. "He found me in the forest you left me in. He saw who I actually was. He told me the truth. And he gave me the ability to see it too." She turned around. She stepped close enough that he could smell what she smelled like now. Not the human softness he had dismissed for 3 years. Rain and ozone and something ancient that had been underground for centuries and had come back up, changed. "You rejected the girl who would have died for you, Silas. Now you have to deal with the woman who is going to live for your downfall." A hand made of pure shadow closed around his throat. Precise, controlled. The Shadow King stepped out of the dark behind her, red eyes burning, presence making the balcony contract around them, and looked at Silas with the flat assessment of something that had watched wolves make calculations for centuries. Mourning her, or mourning the fact that you can no longer use her as a shield. Silas went completely still. April looked at the Shadow King. She nodded once. He released Silas's throat. Tomorrow, the pack seal. Tomorrow came fast. She walked to the center. No speech, no announcement. She raised her hands. The void moved straight toward Silas. He felt it before he understood it. Something reaching into the supernatural architecture of what he was, finding the pack seal, the bond between Alpha and Wolf, the source of everything, and pulling. And then she moved. He screamed, not pain, the agony of something fundamental being removed. The shift, gone. The dominance, gone. The pack bond, gone. Everything that made him Alpha and not just a man, gone. He fell to his knees, looked at his hands, human hands, just hands. He looked up at her, her name in his mouth for the first time like it actually meant something, like he finally understood what it meant. She looked at him, at the man on his knees in the dirt, at the human man, just a man. You told me my only value was my silence. She looked at him one last time. "Goodbye, Silas." She turned. The Shadow King fell into step beside her. The shadow demons parted. She walked out. She did not look back.
Chapter 7. Full Circle. He said goodbye like I was a door closing, said it gently, like he was doing me a kindness. I ran into the oldest forest in the Northern Territories with a wound in my side and fury where my heartbreak should have been. And the monster everyone was afraid of looked at me from the dark and saw me. Not the human liability, not the disposable mate, me. The real size. The thing I had been performing smaller than for 3 years because small was the price of being kept. He brought me a blanket when I fell asleep in his archive. He sat across from me for 40 nights and never once asked me to be anything other than exactly what I was. He told me the truth about everything. And then, with the honesty of something that had been alive for 6 centuries and had decided performance was irrelevant, he said it. I love you. Not strategy, not a claim, the truth. Because he was incapable of anything else. The most feared being in supernatural history had been alone for 600 years, and he said it first. Because 600 years of seeing everyone else's truth meant nobody had ever looked back. Until me. I chose him. Not the power, not the protection. Him. He chose me. Not the vessel, not the weapon. Me. I walked back into that pack hall, sat at the head of the table he thought I could never reach, stripped him of everything he thought made him untouchable. Walked out, and Kale was at the door, where he said he would be, where he always was. The hand that found me in the snow expected nothing, asked nothing, stayed anyway. That is the whole difference. That is the only difference that matters. The Alpha used me as a shield, so I married the monster who eats alphas. And I gave Silas Blackthorn exactly what he gave me. Nothing. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been the one they thought they could throw away, if you have ever loved something that used you and called it devotion, stay. Because this channel is for you. Subscribe if you've ever been the one they underestimated. Because this isn't the last story like this. And the next one is already waiting.